everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for episode 7 of season 3 of Revise and Resubmit. I'm Dr. Kim Bissell, the Southern Progress Endowed Professor in Magazine Journalism and the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Communication and Information Sciences at the University of Alabama.
And I'm Dr. Annalisa Bowen, an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies, also at the University of Alabama. And we both work in the Institute for Communication and Information Research, or the ICIR, at UA. So I have to admit, the fall semester always seems like it flies by. And I do blame football on that a little bit. And what I mean by that is like we work, right? But then we have football on Saturdays and sometimes Sundays.
Yep.
And that seems to take up my entire day. And then it's the next week and we're going to work again. I mean, I'm not complaining because I love football and I actually haven't been to a football game in quite a while. And that's kind of related to our guest today.
That's right. Today we're going to be talking with Dr. Glenn Cummins, a professor of journalism and creative media industries at Texas Tech University. And yes, some of his research is related to football and quite appropriate for a conversation in the fall semester. One of the things that he has studied is how people respond to crowd noise at a football game. Like, what effect does crowd noise have on the viewer experience? It's not something I ever would have even thought about.
Nope.
And I'm not going to spoil the answer. You're going to have to stay tuned to figure out what he found.
And that's not all Glenn's studies. So, Kim, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Listeners can hear the question and answer. When you watch TV, and let's just go with sports here, are you solely focused on the game, like on the TV? Like you have the game on TV and that's it. And that's the only source of information you have coming in. Or is there a possibility that you might also have another screen that you are tuned into?
Guilty. Who watches just one screen? You don't get all the information you need from one screen. And if I'm being totally honest here, I've got the TV on with one game. I might be streaming another game on my iPad, and then I'm following another game on Twitter. So I have a lot of things happening in my football viewing experience.
Nothing to be ashamed of there.
So Dr. Cummins also studies second screens and how they can influence viewing, and he looks really at where the attention is focused. So I just mentioned I have 3 screens in front of me. Where am I focusing my attention? And he incorporates really fancy research methods that he's going to tell us more about, like eye tracking, into his research to see where participants are looking at when they're looking at all these screens. Keep listening to hear about these exciting projects that Glenn is involved in. We want to extend a warm welcome to Glenn. Thanks so much for joining us today, Glenn. We are so thrilled to have you in season 3 with us.
No, I'm happy to be here. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm excited to have a chat.
So, Glenn, we know that you have been at another institution outside of the SEC for many years now.
Mhm.
And I got to ask, what does that do to your general level of fandom for all things SEC and UA sports?
It's kind of
Are you kind of in a safe zone because Texas Tech is not in the same conference? Or how's that all working out?
typically what I tell people is that yes, my paycheck says Texas Tech University, but my diploma says University of Alabama. So that kind of clarifies my allegiances, I hope. But no, I'm definitely in stranger and strange lands when it comes to football. But my neighbor is a diehard Texas Tech fan, and he's a pastor at a local church, and so sometimes he'll talk about me in his sermon. I can't set if it's a good or a bad thing, but I've listened to the recordings, and sometimes there's a groan from the audience when he mentions that I'm an Alabama fan. So I've kind of gotten used to it. I've been here long enough that I've been there and done that.
Well, roll tide to you this morning.
Thank you. Roll Tide.
Glenn, since you are not currently at the University of Alabama, we'd like to give you an opportunity to give us some basic information about who you are and what you do. We call this our rapid fire section of the podcast. So just a few very short, quick questions.
Okay.
All right. So first, where are you from and or where did you grow up?
So I'm originally from Mississippi. I lived there for probably my first 20 something years. Got my undergraduate at University of Southern Mississippi. So I lived kind of in the central part of the state. Lived and worked down in Biloxi on the coast for a few years. So prior to coming to Alabama for grad school, like I said, I'm originally and spent all my time in Mississippi.
Mm. All right. And then you've told us that you're at Texas Tech now. How long have you been there?
Oh, that's a great question. So I've been, this is starting my 15th year at Texas Tech, which is really hard for me to believe. But again, I've been here for 14 years and started as an assistant professor and now have worked my way up. Now I'm a professor in the Department of Journalism and Creative Media Industries. So been here for a long time. This is Lubbock and Texas Tech is all my kids have ever known. So they are native Texans. And like I said, it's hard for me to believe, but time goes really quickly.
I was gonna say time
Yes,
time flies when you're having fun.
that's
Absolutely.
right.
And then when were you at the University of Alabama?
So I did 2 different stints there at Alabama. So after my undergraduate, I went to Alabama from '97 to '99 and got my master's degree in TCF, telecommunication and film. And then I left for a few years and worked in television news, really without any, ultimate plan to come back for the PhD. But after working in TV news for a few years, I came back and got my PhD and finished in 2005. So 2 separate periods with about a 3-year break in between the 2.
All right.
So, Glenn, I have to ask, you mentioned you got your degree in TCF, telecommunications and film, and then you left and kind of worked professionally. What did the young Glenn envision himself doing? Did you have kind of a dream growing up to be a professor? Did that ever kind of cross the radar? What did you see yourself becoming?
Going into academia and doing the professor thing, that wasn't something that was really part of my master plan, so to speak. I mean, I guess if I had a compass that kind of helped me connect the dots about how I got from A to B to C, I've always been interested in the media. I've been interested in our relationship and with the media, with media personalities. Um, it's corny to say that, but that's what's always interested me, even when I was a middle school kid.
Mm.
Making with a video camera and going around shooting videos with friends, that sort of thing. Um, so again, that was what interested me in terms of like a specific career path. I didn't have anything in mind, so to speak. Um, and going back into academia and pursuing the PhD was something I did, like I said, after uh, working in television news for a few years and realizing the things that I was interested in weren't necessarily what my peers in the newsroom really wanted to do and wanted to explore the questions they wanted to answer. So that's kind of my path in terms of how I wound up, in the academic space.
And can you tell us a little bit? So, working in television news, what does that
So it's a
mean?
great question there. So I started off as a videographer,
Hmm.
so going out, again, shooting stories. And then I make the joke there was a mass exodus in the newsroom, and the next thing I know, I'm a producer because they needed producers, and it was a way up the career path. Um, but like I said, my training was in TCF, and I really and still am more interested in the production side of things more than the journalistic news side, news gathering side of things. Um, so again, I was able to do it, and I like to think that I did a good job at it. But like I said, ultimately, the kind of things that I was interested in were different. I was tired of the day after day car versus train accident or
Mm.
the sort of things you do on in a day to day basis in a newsroom. Um, Again, like I said, I was there in the early 2000s as dot coms were growing. I was interested in, the changes I was seeing in the media landscape. I was interested in our relationship with the audience and how that was very quickly becoming a two-way exchange of information. And
Mm.
again, I was interested in questions, and
Mm.
that was very different from going out and saying, "All right, we've got a newscast at 6. We've got to get on the air. Let's cover the story." So much that I actually had a job offer in a top 40 market, and then I had an offer to go back to grad school, and I was kind of weighing the two options, trying to figure out which path I was going to take. And I guess the rest is history because I did come back for the PhD, and here I am all these years later.
So,
Okay,
this is really
so then you've given us a couple of questions. Are that you thought would be interesting to ask and have answered? Is that the area of your scholarship? Can you tell us a little bit about what you researched?
Hey, that's a great question. So, in terms of topical focus, I guess my research identity has been in the area of sports media, um, but it also depends on who I'm talking to. I mean, one thing I always say is that the research that I do, the studies that I conduct, I'm always thinking about me and my undergraduate and even graduate training, but really thinking about my undergraduate degree was in radio, TV, and film, and so I do studies thinking about the person in the control room, the person in the editing bay, the person in the production truck, and again, their training and their decision making, and trying to understand how theory may not inform what they're doing because may not be doing, you know, whatever their task is from a theoretical perspective. But how can theory inform and explain some of their decision making, and how can theory inform and explain how we process and respond to the the product that they're putting out on the air? Um, but I always say I reflect back on me as an undergrad in the editing booth making the videos, and a lot of what I do focuses on production techniques and production decisions, to try and look at that from a social scientific standpoint to see, like I said, how the types of impacts that might have on an audience.
So
Hmm.
I'm really excited to ask this question because I read some of your work just yesterday. But
Okay.
if you had to come up with a headline from one of your more interesting findings, what would that headline be?
It's a great question. So I will say that the past couple of years, I've had a lot of I've taken filled a lot of calls and done some interviews about some stuff that I did pre-pandemic, looking at crowd noise in sports broadcasts. And I did that work not knowing, obviously not knowing we're about to enter a global pandemic, right? I
Mm.
was just interested in how audiences respond to something in sports broadcasts that's always there, but we don't think about. So I was interested in crowd noise. So I guess a headline to answer your question, the headline would be, crowd noise or fake crowd noise, shapes audience response or has shapes fan response to sports. And so that's trying to put it down to a few words that actually fit into a headline. Um, but those, again, I think it's interesting because those are a series of studies that I did because it was answering a question that I couldn't believe no one else had looked at, to my knowledge. Um, so I did these studies looking at how people perceive game events based on the waxing and waning of crowd noise in the broadcast. And again, people have looked at laugh tracks, and people have looked at similar types of cues, like in live environments, like if you're in a comedy club and people around you are laughing, how do we respond? How do we perceive what we're hearing? I couldn't believe no one had looked at that in sports. So I did these studies several years ago, and then lo and behold, all of a sudden we had those scenarios were happening and unfolding in real life, right? We had broadcasters having to put games on the air when there were no fans in the stadium. And
Mm.
how do you do that in a way that again, somewhat replicates a natural game environment. So broadcasters were pumping in fake crowd noise, and then my phone starts ringing. Right, I start getting emails from people across the world saying, "Hey, you've done research on fake crowd noise. What can you tell us?" So again, it was interesting because again, I never dreamed it would become as relevant and important as it did. Unfortunately, over the past couple of years.
Okay, so how do you do these studies? I mean, so obviously you don't have like a crowd in a lab in a different space laughing or cheering and then it being pumped into a participant's ear. And I don't think you have a keyboard probably with
Mm-hmm.
sound effects. But I can't even I can't even imagine like what this study like physically looks like. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So what we did again, one thing I stress is these were controlled experiments, right? Because people can relate back to that. They can think back to their high school chemistry class. Where, all right, you've got control and treatment groups, and this plant's getting a little bit extra sunlight compared to this other plant. So that's the type of scenario or design it was. So we had people were randomly assigned to control or treatment conditions. In a control condition, I did a couple different studies. In the first one, they were listening to a radio broadcast of college women's soccer, and it was the original unedited broadcast. And what they had to do was hold a small dial and then continuously evaluate how exciting the game was. So the control group heard the original unedited broadcast. The treatment group, again, they didn't know. They were told they were just evaluating the student radio station. The treatment group listened to the same broadcast, but what we'd done is we went in and edited
Mhm.
throughout the excerpts that they listened to add in crowd noise. And again, we tried to replicate the waxing and waning because it couldn't be just all screams and cheering all the time. But as the game, there was ebb and flow of the game as players approach goal, and you'd hear the crowd get more excited, and we would add in more of the sound effects, the extra sound effects. Um, and again, those people listened to the broadcast and then turned the dial to evaluate it, and sure enough, what we found is that those who listened to the treatment group followed that audio cue, followed the crowd that they were
Mm.
hearing in the broadcast. And so, oh, this game is more exciting. So that was the first study we did. And the second one we followed up was basically the same design, except in that study, people either just heard the original or edited broadcast, or they saw a video, and it was the same thing. They saw the video of the competition that either had or didn't have the extra crowd noise added in. Um, and then we compared the response between those different groups. So again, it was controlled research lab environment. And I think a lot of people, especially over the past year when I've talked about this, has found it very interesting because I don't think people have that perception about what communication research looks
Mm.
like. So I'll talk about our labs a lot of time, and they'll think about video labs or writing labs. Like no, like research labs where human subjects come in and do studies, take part in experiments.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm gonna
So,
follow up with a question. Based on the study that I read yesterday, I know that you've dabbled
Okay.
around, maybe a little or even a lot, with biometrics equipment and eye tracking. So I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit more about some of the research. I know if you told us all of it, we would be chatting with you for 2 hours, which would be fine. But could you tell us a little bit about some of those studies and how you got into doing
That's a great question. So a lot of what I've done uses I just kind of use a broad umbrella of I call it novel measurement approaches. Um, so again, we've all completed surveys. We can't go grocery shopping without getting a survey invitation. So we're very familiar with survey scales, strongly agree, strongly disagree, and there's obviously value in that, and I certainly do that part of that type of research also. Um, but I've dabbled in and used a lot of different types of measurement approaches. So the crowd noise stuff I was just talking about, we use small handheld dials where people
mhm.
give a same similar type of response, but instead of just giving that after the fact, we're continuously tracking their perception of whatever they're seeing or hearing so that we can start to pinpoint, specific message elements, specific moments within a message that elicit some type of response. Um, so again, another technique I've used that you just asked about. Again, I've done eye tracking research, and that one it really stems from a lot of what I've done is sparked by something I'll see in the media.
Mm.
And when we think about m- viewing portals in general. So we can talk about screens in the broadest possible sense, whether it's our desktop, whether it's our iPad, whether it's our television screen. Again, there are so many different things within that single screen that might be competing for our attention. So again, a lot of what I've done is in the context of sports. And so, man, this has been 14, 15 years ago. I mean, ESPN's a great example of that. We're all used to seeing the ticker at the bottom of the screen with different scores. But if we watch sports highlight, if we watch sports programming, man, the screen is getting more and more crowded with different things competing for our attention. And one of the things I noticed again about 14, 15 years ago was ESPN experimenting with different uh, uh, viewing interfaces that were tiled or might have, picture in picture or have multiple cameras present in a single screen. And that obviously creates a scenario environment where you can't look at everything, right? You have to focus on specific things. And it was very coincidental that we had purchased an eye tracking system here at Texas Tech, and for whatever reason, man, I like technology. I like to tinker, and I said, "Man, this is convenient that I'm seeing this in the media landscape. We have technology that will allow us to track visual attention on a moment by moment basis." So it was really serendipity as much as anything. We had this tool, this measurement approach that I was really interested in, wanted to figure out how to use it, um, and so that's kind of what started me down that path. Um, and like I said, sports media is one scenario, we can talk about that. But I mean, so much of our media consumption, is exactly the same in terms of like different things competing for our attention. So we could talk about our Facebook profile. We could talk about even legacy media, magazines. I mean, there's a lot going on within a single advertisement that might be, trying to draw our attention. We can have the product, we can have advertising headlines or copy. So eye tracking is something I've embraced to try and understand not just our response to a message, but our response to specific elements within a message. Because when we talk about someone responding to an ad, we talk about somebody responding to a news story. Well, what part of the news story are people responding to? Is it the picture? Is it the headline? Is it the copy? We talk about message framing and something having this type of frame versus that type of frame. Well, how is that operationalized? How is that embodied within that news story? Is it through the headline? Is it through the picture? And again, simply manipulating those small but important parts really helps to illuminate and speak to audience response and why somebody might perceive this story to be this way and a different story that's more or less identical but maybe slightly different with respect to some specific message attribute. Well, eye tracking helps illuminate are they actually paying attention to the differences in a message that might serve to operationalize and frame. um, so again, I know that's probably a long-winded answer to the question about eye tracking, but again, I'm really fascinated in how we parse attention when we're consuming media content. And I think that's going to be more and more important as we think about I think about my kids and how they consume media. Man, every time I go in my son's room and he's playing Minecraft, he's got a tablet going on the side with a YouTube video at the same time. And I've tried my best to discourage that, right? I try and be a good dad and limit screen time, but man, I think I'm fighting a losing battle, because that's just typical of how media consumers. Again, that's how I watch TV. I'm watching TV and I've got the iPad going on my lap at the same time.
Mhm.
And I think eye tracking starts to illuminate, like I said, how we parse attention in an increasingly visually complex world.
All right, so I have a couple of questions here to ask. So one, and they're kind of related. So one is, can you ever take your research hat off and just kind of enjoy whatever that means, enjoy sports or media? And then my follow up there is, do you ever are you ever kind of the pilot study participant in your own studies, or do you have your kids participate as kind of pilot studies in your own research?
And there's a couple different questions. I'm gonna have to make sure I answer all of them. Um, I mean, one thing I'll say is that I mean, a lot of my work is autobiographical. Right? I don't think I'm ever going to write a memoir, but I think if you look at what I've done over the course of my career, I can see my personality and my media consumption reflected in all that. Um, so going outside the sports realm, I've done some work in the area of parasocial relationships, parasocial interactions, the relationships we develop with on-screen personalities and persona. And I've looked at empathy. I mean,
Mm,
that's 100% me reflecting on my own media consumption experience.
mm,
I truthfully don't watch. I don't have time, and I just don't watch a lot of television. And maybe I'm at that season in life where I'm going to kids practices and all that sort of stuff. But again, I don't watch a lot. But what I do watch, I'm very picky about. Um, but I love, man, the programs where I can get to know a character and relate
mm.
to that character. And man, I can get sucked into a great story really quickly, and man, I will cry my eyes out. I mean, I can see myself developing those relationships. I still wonder about Jim and Pam from The Office and wonder how they're doing, right? Because I watched those people over, what, 8, 9 years, and I felt like I knew them, and
Mhm.
those are very strong. I mean, those aren't imaginary feelings that I'm having, right? The characters are fictional, but the feelings I'm having and the connection that I'm having is not fictional. Um, so, in that sense, like I said, my work is autobiographical, and when it comes to sports media, it's the same thing. Like I said, the I'll see a sports production or I'll watch something on TV and say, "That's really interesting." And I think about the person on the truck who's, again, the audio engineer who's, again, has control over what we're hearing in the sonic bed of a game. I think about the replay operator. I mean, I think about those people because I reflect back on my experiences as an undergrad, like
Mm.
in working in video production. At Southern Miss, I worked in the unit on campus that produced the coaches shows, and we shot film for the football practice. And so again, I've been there and done a lot of that, and I still think about that and draw upon that in the work that I do. Um, Now you asked about my kids, and that made me laugh because my my kids have never been participants in any of my studies, right? I think there's a conflict of interest there that I probably would feel a little bit dirty about.
Mhm.
My kids, I have brought them into the lab. I think about, like, Piaget and his interest in childhood development. It's like, well, I've never gone quite that far to where, like, I'm writing about my kids in my papers. Um, but they have come into the labs and, been my guinea pig, so to speak, because,
Mm.
again, go back to eye tracking. I was like, "Well, can we eye track with kids?" I knew that we could. I wanted to know logistically, like, what am I looking at? So, yeah, I brought them up on a Sunday afternoon and turned on the eye tracker and said, "Alright, be still and watch this video." Just to see what was technically possible. And
Mhm.
my kids have done studies for other colleagues in the labs. So again, not my research, but I've got, pictures and videos I've made over the years of them coming in to do study, and they think it's a lot of fun.
Mhm.
And so, they're very much so obviously a part of my life, but I mean they're part of my professional life too. And they know about the labs that we have here, and they're jealous. They can't believe that we have this great living room lab here where people come in and play video games. And my son's like, "Man, you've got a PlayStation, you never use it?" I was like, "Well, I'm working, son. Like I've got things to do. I can't just hang out in the lab and play video games." That still blows his mind that we have those resources here, and that's part of what I call work.
Uh-huh.
So, shifting gears on you just a little bit, Glenn, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the classes that you've taught and how or if the research that you do makes it into your own classroom.
So, I've taught a lot of different classes, undergraduate and graduate, and I mean the short answer is yes. So this semester I'm teaching a sports media seminar, and so we're a few of you know, the articles that I've done are on the reading list, but and I don't know if this is unusual or not. I don't like to talk about my work because I know what I've done, right? I
Mhm.
know the studies that I've, but I'm interested in reading what other people are doing and what other people have done, and I like to draw inspiration from that. So,
Mhm.
I mean, the syllabus isn't like, Glenn Cummins, seminar in Glenn Cummins, because I don't want to teach that, and I can't imagine anybody would want to take it, right? Um, so my interest, my topical interest, my methodological interest, that factors into my classes and it makes it into the classroom. But like I said, I don't like talking about the stuff that I've done because, man, I've been there and done that. Uh, Unless it specifically advances some question that we're trying to tackle, and then it makes topical sense to include it. I'll put it in there. Um, in terms of my undergrad classes, my work, my research and scholarship factors into it less, but
Mhm.
my interest in the media in the broadest possible sense, very much so, is part of those classes. And I don't know if this, I mean, I love to go into a classroom and see myself in the audience, see that young adult who has that same interest and fascination in electronic media. And from a production standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a social and impact on society standpoint, I love seeing that kindred spirit. So again, my interest in how I got into this in this profession, from the get go, that very much so is part of my classroom environment, and I get excited when I see that and get to talk about it.
Mm.
So, just picking up along this kind of line of thought here, speaking of classroom experiences, did you have the opportunity to be in a classroom with Jennings Bryant? Do you have a funny or interesting Dr. Jennings Bryant story that you'd like to share?
Oh, that's a great question. So, Jennings was my PhD advisor when I was, and my master's chair when I was there at Alabama. Um, Man, there's just not enough time for me to say all the great things I could say about him. Um, I will say that, I mean, aside from my parents, probably there's no one person that had a bigger influence on my life than him. So
Mm.
when I think about and the life I have, the career I have, the success I have, I mean, so much of it is due to him. Um, so I did get to have him in the classroom too. Several different seminars, a seminar on children in media, and some different ones when I was there. Um, Really, it was the experiences beyond the classroom that had the biggest impact. Because I think about, man, he opened up his life so much to me. So it wasn't just having the seminar once a week and the readings and those sorts of interactions. It was the lunches, and I know people talk about trips to the farm, and how much, like I said, working with him meant
Mhm.
not just having that professional relationship, but really becoming part of his life and becoming part of his family. So that, like I said, it was a profound experience that I'm just forever grateful for, and still try and emulate. I mean, all these years into my career, and I'm still aspiring to be as much as possible, like him, and conduct myself, professionally, personally. Like I said, he just set the mold for what I aspire to.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. So one other question that I have, just kind of shifting back to your research, is where do you go? Where are you going next?
That's a great question in terms of the research. So in terms of where I'm going next, I just finished. I've been serving here at Texas Tech as our associate dean for research for the past
Mm,
8 years, and it's been just a tremendous experience, and one that I'm very happy that I got to enjoy. But this is the first semester, so I'm returning back and being a quote unquote normal faculty member again, and that excites me because again, I really enjoyed being associate dean for research, but I think part of that is being a little bit selfless in terms of the types of things I do, the types of projects I do. So
mm,
what's next for me is really trying to rediscover and reconnect with again what I kind of view as my scholarly identity, and focusing back
mm,
on maybe it's sports and media, focusing back on where I see the media landscape going in the near or distant future, whichever the case may be. But really
mhm,
trying to get back to the things that really are my passion, and answering the questions that I really find most interesting. Again, going back to eye tracking, I mean,
mhm,
I'm really interested in augmented reality and what that's going to look like. And I've never thought of myself as like a futurist, right? I don't go around, pontificating about where things are going,
uh-huh,
but I genuinely think that that's going to be in our future sooner rather than later. A
mm,
lot of times researchers in the last few years have done studies looking at the second screen, and I've talked today about how my son surrounds himself with a
mhm.
tablet on the sidewalks. Well, I think the very near future, the second screen is going to be our glasses, and
Oh,
we're going to be at the football stadium or baseball stadium, and we're going to be watching the game while our Twitter feed is scrolling, in our
oh,
heads up display within our glasses. I think those types of environments are gonna be persistent. I think they're gonna be everywhere, and I'm interested again in how that's going to impact the consumption experience.
mm,
Uh, and so I think the other thing that I've discovered or decided after all these years is that, I'm very much so, a social my mode of research is, social science.
mm,
I like my labs. I like to collect data like that in controlled environments. And I that will always be a part of my research identity, but I
mhm,
increasingly am embracing the fact that, some of the questions I want to answer can't be answered in a lab.
mm,
That maybe the mode of research I've employed all these years isn't the sole way. And I've always known that's not the only way to study things, but I
mhm,
think there's a lot of wisdom in embracing a lot of different techniques. And again, I'm really open to again going down some new roads that I haven't been down before.
So I think that what you just said, is really kind of at the heart of being a researcher, is that you have questions that you kind of constantly develop, and they evolve, and then you have new ones, but you're also really open, um, to not knowing everything, and being willing to see kind of what's on the horizon as far as the area of research, and that's cool.
No,
That's
absolutely.
very
And the in terms of this as a profession, this as a job, you know there's the classes we teach, and there's the grading of papers, and I mean, they're the things that are quote, that we do recognize as being work.
Mhm.
But man, the research that we do, the questions I want to answer, I know that's part of my job, and I know that's how I'm evaluated, and I mean, I know that's what we get paid to do. And that part, that's the fun part, and that's the
Mhm.
part that, again, I can't that's where I do, wake up and say, "Man, I can't believe I get to do this, for a
Mm,
living." Because it sounds corny, but, man, those are my passions, and I don't see that part of my job as work. Um,
mm,
Man, I'm happiest when I get to spend, a few hours working on a research paper that I'm writing, or exposing myself to literature I haven't read before. And it's like, "Man, that was a great day." If I can spend
mm,
a few hours doing that, then I'll chalk it up as a great day. Because, again, there's other parts of our careers that, that, again, I enjoy. I mean, I love
mm,
being in a classroom. I come from a long line of teachers, and I love connecting with students. Um, but I like I said, the monotony of grading and planning out a syllabus, and I mean, it's fun, but that's part of my job. The
mhm.
research and exploring, man, that's the fun part, and I don't really think of that as quote unquote work.
So I have one last question for you. You've told us and our listeners kind of where you're going research wise, but I also want to ask that question in more of a literal um,
Okay.
manner. So what's on the horizon as far as conferences to present the research? Hopefully, not virtual, but we'll see. Where are you going next there?
So I think the 2 conferences where I could see myself going, in the hopefully near future, right? I've been to pretty much all the ones within our organization, but I love going to BEA, Broadcast Education Association, and its annual meeting is always in the spring. I enjoy that because it's a great chance to interface with not just, scholars within the discipline, but also those within academia who are teaching, the production, but also working when interfacing with, people actually in the broadcast industry. And then the other one I'm really looking forward to is hopefully going back to AEJMC in a
Hmm.
physical sense. I love the people there. I love the organization, the environment, the scholarship. I mean, there's just so many different areas of research. But then also, I love the season. Right, it's the end of the summer, and I'm rested and relaxed and
Mm.
ready to go and dive in again. To me, so that I enjoy the like I said, that marks the end of the summer and the renewed spirit and getting back into the academic uh, mindset going into the fall semester.
Mm.
Glenn, it has been so much fun catching up with you and hearing more about all that you've been doing since your time at UA. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, this was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
All right.
Glenn.
Take care.